A pregnant dog's obstinate unwillingness to give birth takes an unexpected and startling turn during a routine ultrasound examination. The veterinarian calls the police right away, since what he sees on the screen is so concerning. What's hidden? Law enforcement could become involved in a secret in a fairly normal way. It started like any other day. The quiet murmur of talk and the gentle rustle of conversation permeated the air inside a quiet suburban veterinary clinic. Magazines in the waiting area. Samantha Cole, a skilled physician, a kind veterinarian with decades of expertise, had either seen it all or she therefore believed that Mrs. Jenkins had brought in Bella that morning in a kind but nervous. Bella, a stray dog adopted by a neighborhood rescue organization, was obviously pregnant, and Mrs. Jenkins hoped that she would shortly give birth to a litter of healthy puppies while being cared for by Dr. Cole. Bella's health was normal during the first examination, although there was a hint of. She appeared distressed with caring hands, Dr. Cole, as evidenced by the strain in her eyes. As the screen flashed to life, they were ready to do an ultrasound, a routine procedure to track Bella's progress. Dr. Cole's seasoned eyes were fixed on the pictures that were being shown to her in what ought to have been Bella's belly, which should have revealed a simple glimpse of canine pregnancy, took an unexpected turn. Instead, a picture so strange and incomprehensible that Dr. Cole's heart started to race was displayed, along with obvious signs of developing puppies. Unsettling forms and shadows that defied a canine's typical anatomy were exhibited on the ultrasonography during the race. With each second that went by, the initial perplexity swiftly turned into anxiety. The pictures became more bizarre, and Dr. Cole's thoughts were racing if she had come across an unusual medical condition, or was there anything much more unsettling going on? Growing more agitated, she moved away from the console and grabbed the phone during that tense exchange with her professional instincts informed her that this was not a case for a ghostly picture that was still pulsing on the screen. Usual explanation, and a few seconds later, the sound of the phone ringing reverberated. Dr. Cole's shaking voice described the incident to a colleague in the sterile examination room, but he was unable to. She made a choice that would turn an ordinary day into a dramatic one in an attempt to overcome the overwhelming feeling of dread. Chaos. She dialed the police as distant sirens started to blare. The calm clinic was abruptly changed into a tense and uneasy atmosphere. What precisely had Bella been concealing, and how would this startling revelation change everyone's lives following the normally quiet veterinary clinic was suddenly interrupted by a phone call and the flashing lights of the oncoming police cars. Dr. Samantha Cole's mind raced in a state of unsettling disarray as she attempted to comprehend the strange pictures that were still visible on the ultrasound screen in the clean examination room with the peaceful hum of machinery and the antiseptic smell were now tinged with a tension that was practically tangible in the days that ensued after the mystery of Bella the stray dog, whose grudging effort had disrupted a regimen. Checkups started to take shape, laying the groundwork for a sequence of actions that would challenge all those involved. But at its core was Bella, Bella was a soulful creature whose eyes conveyed the weight of her situation despite her advanced pregnancy. Obstinately refused to give birth, as if her body were against the normal course of labor. Jenkins' missus had taken Bella from the streets and taken her to the clinic, as they watched with increasing concern and incredulity. Mrs. Jenkins had taken care of Bella because of her quiet kindness and her commitment to helping all animals in need, with compassion and optimism, but Bella was still not exhibiting any symptoms of labor. Even following hours of observation, Mrs. Jenkins started to worry that something was seriously amiss. Dr. Cole, a veteran in her, despite having decades of experience, the ultrasound scans presented a situation she had never thought of. Instead of the anticipated distinct outlines of growing puppies on the screen, they were perplexing and extremely unnerving. Briefly revealed strange dark forms and warped structures that went against all known K9 anatomy norms. She thought there could be an unusual medical condition, but the more she looked at the pictures, the more she feared what might be the source of this enigmatic resistance, and why was Bella's body defying nature's path in an attempt to stabilize the rapidly worsening situation. Dr. Cole chose to remove Bella from the chaos by gently assured Mrs. Jenkins that she would make every effort to determine what was causing Bella's suffering. She described the typical protocol for handling challenging births with skillful care, emphasizing the significance of guaranteeing the mother's and her unborn puppy's protection. But as she carried out her investigation, she couldn't get rid of the sensation that something was seriously wrong, and the police. Dr. Cole contacted her after she arrived and started grilling the clinic staff regarding the strange ultrasound results. Dependable co-worker, Dr. Michael Alvarez, a veterinary pathologist too, asked for a second opinion, and Dr. Alvarez agreed to come to the clinic right away. Potential awareness that the case may expose clues to a previously unheard of situation, while the strain in the clinic expanded as patients' anxious looks and whispers filled the waiting room. Both employees and staff were left wondering what secret was concealed by Bella's refusal to give birth as the day wore on. Mrs. Jenkins remembered bits and pieces of Bella's previous tales from the neighborhood. Animal shelter regarding the memories of the dog being discovered shivering and alone on a chilly night provided a poignant element to the drama that was developing if Bella had gone through a horrific event in her past that her body's natural instincts were now impacted by her refusal to produce a defense mechanism that had been developed over years of considering suffering and neglect. These inquiries would eventually provide as the foundation for a more extensive inquiry into the enigmatic causes of Bella's status. Amid all of this confusion, local news reports started to emerge. After learning about the incident from social media buzz and worried whispers, the crew arrived at the clinic to record the events as they happened. Their cameras caught unscripted moments. Mrs. Jenkins caressed Bella's matted fur with tears of concern, and Dr. Cole's wrinkled brow as she examined the confusing ultrasound, and even the police officer's nervous looks as, after reviewing the data, they concluded that the incident, which started as a normal checkup, was quickly developing into a tale that captured the hearts of all listeners as the mood in the clinic remained solemn but determined, and Dr. Cole prepared a thorough report that painstakingly records each abnormality seen during the ultrasound. All throughout Bella's test, she was aware that the answers would not be simple, yet she remained steadfast in her investigation to determine the root cause of Bella's illness. Her professional obligation, coupled with her natural empathy for the ailing animal in front of her, motivated her to pursue additional knowledge. Whereas Mrs. Jenkins, despite being devastated by Bella's suffering, she took comfort in the clinic staff's tiny gestures of goodwill. Additionally, other pet owners who came to the waiting area told tales of their own struggles, and their cherished animals' mysterious behavior served as a gentle reminder that occasionally nature's mysteries are inexplicable. During those initial hours of doubt, the groundwork was established for a more thorough investigation that would look at Bella's medical odds as well as Dr. Cole's call to the police also highlights the larger picture of how trauma and abuse may change an animal's instincts. Motivated by an unwavering intuition that something was amiss, a medical irregularity triggered a series of events, which will shortly bring in professionals from law enforcement and the community to support the Bella case was quickly developing into a complex mystery that required solutions and promised revelations that would question accepted beliefs regarding canine behavior and maternal instincts. In the days after the eerie clinic morning, when Dr. Samantha Cole and After Michael Alvarez reviewed the strange ultrasound pictures, a troubling prospect started to emerge. Potential that would challenge all of their preconceived notions regarding Bella's health. One late afternoon, when the clinic was almost empty and the exam room was covered with long shadows from the waning light, Dr. Alvarez sat by himself with his eyes, which were already exhausted from working through the night, suddenly widened as the ultrasound footage continued to play on his monitor. As he became aware of a persistent irregularity that he had nearly overlooked during his first examination, the odd forms on the screen had been written off as temporary shadows or artifacts that occasionally happen while imaging. But when he went back and watched the video again, a terrifying pattern appeared. Inside Bella's uterus were a number of tiny, sharply defined, and strangely angular formations that are not typical of scar tissue or any normal fetal formation. They formations had the distinct appearance of alien artifacts, and Dr. Alvarez wondered if they be pieces of a surgical implant or possibly proof of intentional manipulation with a trembling hand he referred to as Dr. Cole. He pointed to the monitor and said, "Look at this, Sam. These aren't natural. They're so exact, almost like they were added on purpose." Dr. Cole, as she examined the pictures of the objects, she leaned in her face, becoming pale, dispersed throughout the tissue, and their positioning indicated that they may have been utilized to obstruct Bella's natural. During the childbirth process, they both realized that Bella's resistance to give birth might not a rare medical condition at all, but rather the outcome of intentional intervention that was not contained. Her alert Dr. Cole promptly recorded her observations in a thorough. She said, "I've never seen anything like this in detail. It looks like Bella's reproductive system has been interfered with. This could be evidence of illicit breeding techniques or even trafficking in animals." The seriousness of her remarks hung over the room as both physicians realized that, instead of a simple instance of dystocia, they were suddenly involved in something much more sinister. Soon after, the police who had been contacted because of the frightening pictures came back to the clinic with forensic. As the investigation progressed, specialists urged Dr. Alvarez to provide his. He described the ultrasound results with a mix of professional disdain and personal indignation, explaining that they show foreign. The shape and location of the items embedded in Bella's uterine wall clearly imply non-accidental damage. This looks to be a purposeful suppression of the birthing process rather than a congenital abnormality, according to Layden's research. Filled the small community with shockwaves of genuine emotion and medical jargon. In the meantime, Mrs. Jenkins, who had provided Bella with tender care, was struck by a. She sobbed, her voice breaking as she remembered how someone could have betrayed her. The revelation led to a thorough investigation into how Bella had been saved from the streets. Rumors started to circulate about the institution where Bella had been taken initially. That Bella's early years were spent at a dilapidated shelter that served as a front for an illicit breeding network, intended to benefit from manipulating canine reproduction while the police investigated. Testimonies from former workers of that facility began to surface. One emotional whistleblower described how animals were frequently exposed to intrusive procedures without giving their informed consent, and their normal cycles are being disturbed by. They treated the canines like merchandise using chemical or mechanical methods. The witness muttered nothing more than tools to optimize revenue. These accounts gave Bella's condition depicting a criminal network that uses sophisticated methods in addition to abusing animals. Techniques to guarantee that they couldn't procreate naturally. During a heated press conference at the clinic the next day, a room full of reporters confronted Dr. Cole and Dr. Alvarez. Her voice faltered as she reported the results, which provide unmistakable proof that Bella's illness is due to intentional manipulation. This situation transcends veterinary practice and is the disclosure sparked popular indignation and a demand to action against those who would take advantage of innocent lives for profit. Prompted demands for more stringent regulation of animal breeding operations, and advocacy organizations teamed up with the law. For the first time, the community recognized that law enforcement was demanding that the offenders be brought to justice. That what started out as a standard ultrasound had revealed a sinister underside, a secret world where criminal enterprises were using the twist to influence helpless animals, stunning Bella the kind. The stray who had refused to give birth was not afflicted by an unexplainable medical condition, but rather by conscience. The proof of the act of cruelty was unmistakable, and it signaled the start of a larger investigation that was expected to reveal a whole illicit animal trafficking network when forensic testing were. Doctors Alvarez and company promised to accelerate the process and execute search warrants. Bella's sacrifice would not be in vain if they continued their pursuit of truth and found these. The revelation of the dark secrets by foreign objects has started a series of events that would test not only their expertise as well as the community's overall moral compass. Everyone at the clinic was stunned by the ultrasound's startling revelation during the sterile, silent examination. Dr. Samantha, the seriousness of what had been found gradually started to sink into everyone's expressions. Do Michael Alvarez and Cole continue to consider the evidence of intentional tampering in Bella's reproductive system, looked at each other for a long time in distress. The doctor's former assurance had been replaced with an uncomfortable mixture of personal indignation and professional incredulity. Cole spoke to Dr. Alvarez in a quiet but tremulous voice as they. Later that day, I collected their notes. I never thought that someone would go so far as to obstruct a dog's natural. Bella's suffering isn't the result of a terrible accident. Rather, it's an act of cruelty that we have a responsibility to reveal this. As her eyes read from hours of study and restless anxiety, showing how profoundly the revelation was affecting her personally, Dr. Alvarez nodded sadly, adding, "This isn't just. When it comes to medicine, we have to record every detail in order to protect the weak, to ensure that justice is done and that no animal ever has to endure such suffering again." While Mrs. Jenkins, the soul that had saved Bella and treated her like her own, was overcome with a mix of despair and she gripped a faded picture of Bella in the silent corner of the waiting room with shaking hands, full of righteous rage. She muttered to herself later, "How could someone do this to such a gentle creature in happier days?" When a clinic. Mrs. Jenkins sobbed when a nurse gently approached her. "I rescued Bella from the chilly streets, and it's painful to watch her in this state." The nurse reassured her with gentle words, telling Mrs. Jenkins that every attempt would be made to find the truth. She was only able to shake her head in grief and make the decision that she would not allow Bella's suffering to continue unresolved outside the clinic. The news of the discovery started to stir up the neighborhood, and the police officer who had been initially summoned because of the concerning ultrasound results, they held an unplanned press conference in a nearby. Daniels, a young but sincere student in the course, was a public space officer. Our initial analysis reveals that reporters who exhibit a combination of clinical detachment and tangible concern. Bella's reproductive system has signs of alien items, which strongly suggest that these objects are not incidental interference. We are investigating this as a possible instance of unlawful tampering and animal maltreatment, and we strongly advise anyone with additional details to be revealed. His pronouncement, which was made in a calm manner, instantly sparked a rush of media inquiries that alluded to a far more extensive network of cruelty that was concealed in the animal welfare advocates and the shadows of the local animal trade at the same time. And nearby rescue groups promptly dispatched a representative of the M. Lacey Regional Animal Rights Organization, called a meeting in a community center's small conference room with other concerned people, and voices raised with outrage as they talked about the ramifications of Bella's case, which exposes more than one instance of Mrs. Lacey reported, but there may have been widespread mistreatment in some breeding farms. We need to take immediate action to help Bella and any other animals that could be in pain behind locked doors. The group was inspired by fervent speech, and preparations were promptly developed to launch a community watchdog program that would simultaneously keep an eye on local news and breeding and shelter facilities. After crews became aware of the story, they started airing live reports. One such program included reporter Angela Martinez, observed a clearly shaken Dr. Cole in the corridor of the clinic. Dr. Cole clarified something new, her voice steadying as she, considering the unsettling pictures. "I hope that Bella's case is proof of intentional manipulation rather than merely a medical abnormality. Our findings will result in prompt action against the individuals who delivered Angela's on-camera performance, along with footage of Bella's uncomfortable repose in her recovery cage, gave the investigation a human face, leading to several. In light of the mounting public outcry, viewers can demand justice by sharing the story on social media. Even Dr. As he and a few other co-workers talked over coffee in the break room, Alvarez sensed his professional determination solidifying. The wider ramifications. One colleague may be investigating an illicit breeding enterprise or possibly a trafficking ring. Hypothesized that if Bella is only one of many victims, then we have a duty as participants in this, as well as veterans, community to assist in ending it. Their discussion, interspersed with determination and frustration, demonstrated a shared resolve to not allow. As the day gradually grew into night in the clinic, Dr. Cole remained to review Bella's suffering. She updated her thorough report and delivered copies to all parties after gathering all the information in a quiet, dimly lit office. Her fingers quivered as she spoke to the local animal protection groups and the police. She typed, but her determination increased with each word she wrote. "I won't stop until all the evidence is." After being examined, she quietly declared that Bella deserved justice and that all animals who must be safeguarded. By the end of the day, the initial shock had given way to a concerted attempt to face the looming danger. Each character is the committed vet who, grieving caregiver, the hardworking police, the passionate campaigners, and they were united by a new reality. And even the local media had started to adapt. A common goal to combat the abuse exposed by Bella's case and guarantee that no animal would ever have to withstand such anguish once more amid the growing public uproar. A number of unexpected subplots emerged throughout the forensic inquiry into Bella's unsettling state, making an already bad situation even more complicated as Dr. Cole and Dr. Alvarez persisted in recording their discoveries, and rumors of more serious corruption surfaced outside of the nursery, institution where Bella had been saved, but also in the neighborhood that one day came together to demand justice. In the silence of her office, Dr. Cole was going through old documents when she got an anonymous mail. Inside, she discovered a number of old photos and scribbled notes that suggested the murky side of a nearby animal breeding. The notes detailed covert gatherings between dishonest breeders and even mentioned Project Rebirth, a clandestine effort that appeared to be intended to alter the natural reproduction. The images showed a plain building on the outskirts of the city, the identical facility from Cycles of Dogs for Profit. Dr. Cole's hands quivered when she saw that this was not an emergency, as Bella had been saved years before. Isolated instance. It was a component of a more widespread systemic misuse that had probably claimed the lives and health of numerous animals in danger, as Dr. Cole realized the seriousness of this new revelation. Found herself feeling more and more conflicted between her obligation to safeguard and care for her patients and, late one night, she was dragged into a shadowy investigation that posed serious risks to her personal and professional safety. As she was about to leave the clinic, an encrypted text message buzzed on her phone. "If you value your safety, stay quiet." The chilling threat made her consider the repercussions of seeking the truth, even though she knew you were asking inquiries additionally. She remembered the image of Bella's tormented eyes from the ultrasound, and she was aware that turning a blind eye was out of the question when the police inquiry started to uncover fissures in the breeding facility's exterior that a crucial witness and former employee saw. Known as Mr. Daniels came out to testify about the invasive practices of forced breeding cycles. Without anesthetic and by controlling a dog's reproductive cycle with prohibited medications. But before he able to appear in court, Mr. Daniels disappeared without a trace, sending shockwaves through the local animal protection group and sparked concerns that those in charge would do whatever it took to conceal their wrongdoings. There were suspicions that Mr. Daniels had been threatened, and there were rumors that some local police officers may even be connected to the illicit activity at the internal conflicts started to simmer within the clinic at the same time, and Lisa, one of the veterinary technicians, I've always been a quiet and hard worker, but late at night, I started getting anonymous calls with a low voice. Lisa was terrified by the interaction, and he gave her a threatening warning to keep her mouth shut about the ultrasound results. Told Dr. Cole, who acted right away to make sure that every employee was informed of the possible risks of the inquiry. However, the majority of the clinic staff supported Dr. Cole's resolve to find the truth. Some were obviously concerned about the repercussions of contesting a well-connected criminal network outside the clinic's boundaries. The neighborhood started to disintegrate due to the disclosures, while social activists and animal rights organizations celebrated the data as a victory in the battle against. Certain local business leaders and certain government officials are concerned about animal exploitation. Of the scandal's potential to damage the city's image, began advocating for a swift and possibly. It was reported that a well-known city councilman with a conservative view of urban development had being in communication with members of the criminal network that runs breeding facilities. His discreet but constant. Some community members' resistance to the investigation sowed doubts. making mobilization efforts more difficult. Brought support at the same time that a local reporter from competing news. In contrast to Sarah's sympathetic reporting, the outlet started investigating the story. This journalist's strategy was more sensational. He released speculative articles that had inspired the community, publications that cast doubt on the clinic employees' intentions, and even suggested that Bella's illness might have been. However, these parts were purposely induced as part of an experimental program. Unverified exacerbated the instability by dividing the public and increasing suspicion among the investigative teams. And some community members in the midst of all these difficulties, Mrs. Jenkins, who had shown Bella unfailing kindness, was torn between her affection for the dog and the knowledge. Maybe late one night, while consoling Bella in bed, she might have unintentionally participated in a bigger criminal conspiracy. She started to sob quietly in the rear of the clinic, not just because she was saddened by the pain she saw, but also because her emotional collapse was caused by her overpowering dread that justice might never be served. Observed by a compassionate nurse highlighted the human cost of the exploitation, which is quantified not only in bodily pain as well as severe psychological damage, according to the investigation. Expanded a coalition of concerned citizens and animal welfare advocates. An independent watchdog group coordinated with local law enforcement by setting up secret meetings, and flyers were given out to encourage possible whistleblowers like Mr. Daniels. Public protests and social media campaigns were organized to put pressure on authorities to carry out a thorough and open investigation into the functioning of the breeding facilities. The community was now at a turning point, with not just the direct danger of a dishonest criminal organization, but also the chance that, in this whirlpool of competing interests, influential interests would stifle their emerging movement for justice. Bella's case has changed from a simple medical condition to a representation of both internal anxieties and external threats. Systemic abuse as a rallying cry for everyone who thought that even the stakes had increased, and even the tiniest act of cruelty needed to be revealed and eliminated, greater than anybody had anticipated, and a struggle for the truth had evolved into a struggle for the community's own spirit in the. Following the startling disclosures, the clinic turned into a furnace of mixed feelings where everyone's decision had serious repercussions, and Dr. Samantha Cole found herself ensnared in a tumultuous internal conflict late one night after the forensic team had been dispatched and the police had left. She stayed by herself in her office after being briefed, with the faint glow of the computer screen illuminating piles of case notes. And her thoughts were always filled with sonogram pictures of Bella, the kind dog who had endured unspeakable abuse. Given the wider ramifications of what they had discovered in a vulnerable moment, she answered the phone. She called Dr. Alvarez Michael, her close friend and co-worker. "I'm unable to put Bella out of my mind," she admitted, her voice faltering with a mixture of grief and resolve each time I glance at. In those pictures, I perceived not just abnormalities of the body, but also the eerie proof of intentional maltreatment. How can we even start to combat something this terrible? Dr. Alvarez's response was calm, but empathetic. "Sam, I recognize your suffering. Justice for those who are mute is more important than medicine. Yet we must," his words echoed in the quiet, "be careful. The deeper we dig, the more dangerous this could become for all of us." That came next served as a clear reminder of the danger that the clinic was about to face. The woman who had saved Bella from the streets, Mrs. Jen, struggled with her own suffering. She had long borne the scars of. She was devastated to learn that the dog she loved had endured such abuse after experiencing neglect and bereavement. Faint hope one calm afternoon while she held a Warren in the waiting room. Picture of Bella when she was happier, when Lisa, a young veterinary technician, approached her with kind eyes. Showed a great deal of concern. "Mrs. Jenkins, are you okay?" Lisa inquired quietly as she sat. As Mrs. Jenkins said, "I don't." Tears filled her eyes. "I feel so helpless. Honey, like I've let Bella down, and now there are all these questions." When Lisa realized that what had occurred to her was nearly unbearable, she reached out and gave her a silent squeeze. Sometimes showing solidarity involves confronting heartbreak head-on. "We're all here to support you. You and I will figure out how to give Bella justice because you showed her love when no one else did, and that's what matters most. However, in the meantime, tensions outside the clinic remained simmering today. Dr. Cole's planned meeting with local animal welfare advocates was compelled to address the ethical dilemmas raised by her participation in a small community space at the neighborhood library overlapped in contentious debates. One activist, Mr. Carter, a longtime participant, urged that Dr. Cole, you must realize that the data we've discussed calls for the destruction of a corrupt system that goes beyond a medical issue. Dr. Cole's eyes, which showed both professional rigor and vulnerability, and Mr. Carter's stare was filled with great compassion. I completely agree, she continued, but I'm concerned about the repercussions. If we exert too much pressure, we could put Bella and everyone involved in this in risk. The room grew silent as the speaker asked how to strike a balance between the demand for justice and the safety of people who are already so vulnerable. A young volunteer who was quivering a little as he said added, "We're caught," as the gathering began to feel the weight of her words. Between safeguarding our neighborhood and exposing a systemic corruption, I worry that if this becomes public, those involved might permanently quiet us. Dr. Quay, feeling the collective. I know that every step we take is a big burden, but anxiety replied with quiet resolution. There are risks involved, but if we let brutality continue unchecked, then we must move cautiously and together, since we have all failed these innocent souls. As Dr. Company left the meeting that evening, she ran into Officer Daniels outside, a young police officer who had demonstrated true compassion. I just wanted to let you know, Dr. Cole, that during his earlier remarks, while with earnestness, he stated, I have a duty to perform. I'm on your side. I believe in helping those who can't protect themselves, and your discoveries are significant, but proceed with caution. Her heart warmed at his honesty, but as she left, she was reminded of the inherent risks of opposing strong forces, swore in silence that she would not compromise her support for Bella's case, even if it meant jeopardizing her own tranquility later that. At night, Lisa and another technician gathered in the clinic's silent hallways to talk about the last night. I received another phone urging me to cease asking questions about the anonymous threats that had been coming in. You could hear the terror in their words, but you could also hear their resolve. The other firmly responded, we can't let them intimidate us. Bella's suffering necessitates that we go on regardless of the cost. Their determination, while with caution, strengthened an increasing belief among the employees that even if it meant venturing into hazardous ground in these complicated situations, the pursuit of justice and truth was paramount. Conversations with community activists, the contentious arguments, and the silent moments of collective sorrow. The serious phone conversations between Dr. Cole and Dr. Jenkins, between Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa Alvarez and Officer Daniels' uplifting remarks create an emotional tapestry. Each character faced challenges as they struggled with dread, responsibility, and the intense desire to right a terrible wrong, since they were aware that the fight ahead would put their professional limitations to the test, as well as the power of their beliefs and the BS that kept them united after the moral and emotional upheaval that had overtaken the community and clinic, causing a fresh wave of dread and uncertainty to permeate every area of the late one evening, while the fluorescent lights in the clinic hummed above and the outside world was. Dr. Cole got a quick, mysterious email while shrouded in darkness. Stopped looking into Bella's case because it only has a couple brief lines and no signature. Else there will be dire repercussions. Not all secrets should be revealed. Dr. Cole was already shivering at the icy tone of the email. Weighed down by Bella's suffering, understood that this was not a mere threat, but rather a direct warning from someone who. Her hands trembled as she printed the email, preferring to keep the breeding operations shadowy underside hidden, and placed it in her case files as a sobering reminder that things were getting more serious at the same time. The local police were occupied with investigating the fresh testimony from the former. Rumors of illicit tampering and forced breeding were spread by employee Mr. Daniels. Officer Daniels, the sympathetic police officer who had previously offered Dr. Cole his assistance, was observed spreading like wildfire. We're now following several leads after talking with 2 undercover investigators. He discreetly told a coworker. There is whispered discussion of a network that extends well beyond a single facility. We may be facing a syndicate that has strong connections to the trafficking of animals, and they will not allow us to expose them without a battle. As these tension in the community increased noticeably as foreboding signs of organized crime started to emerge. Encouraged by the growing evidence, rights organizations staged a demonstration outside the clinic one chilly morning with banners. With slogans like "Stop the Abuse Known" and "Justice for Bella," protesters gathered there, voices coming together to form a collective roar against the exploitation that they now saw was occurring in plain sight among the M. Jenkins' tearful visage, which was a mix of sadness and ferocity, appeared among the audience. "Resoluteness, Bella didn't deserve this," she sobbed, her voice resonating with grief and rage, "and we must defend." Sarah's investigation took an unexpected turn for her and all the animals that had suffered in silence at the same time. Then, when she went over more documents that she had gotten from anonymous sources, she found a number of encrypted documents that alluded to a project known solely as Project Rebirth, files that, when partially decrypted, suggested the application of experimental techniques to allusions to precision manipulation and control K9 reproduction, words that repressed natural cycles and supported Dr. Alvarez's thoughts that Sarah was intrigued and disturbed by Bella's situation and set up a private meeting with her. In a dim corner of a practically empty diner, an informant going by the name JG. Jay spoke softly, and they're actually employing these for the urgent Project Rebirth techniques on numerous animals. Bella is only one of many victims. If you delve deeper, you may discover that this network extends beyond your wildest expectations. Sarah captured every word that came to her heart palpitating in the knowledge that the case had developed into something much more sinister than a single act of cruelty. Meanwhile, there was a pervasive sense of anxiety among Dr. Cole's personnel inside the facility. Already on edge from the previous anonymous threats, Lisa the veterinarian started to report strange things. In a whispered voice, the technician revealed that she had noticed an unknown vehicle parked outside the clinic late at night. "I'm not sure if it's connected, but she confessed that she felt like someone was watching us on multiple occasions." Voice quivering as she told a worried co-worker the specifics, the ST staff's anxiety increased in the clinic. Access to sensitive places was more carefully enforced, security measures were subtly strengthened, and cameras were altered. Controlled concurrently during a contentious discussion with a well-known community leader and local animal welfare advocates, asked for clarification on the number of animals that have been exposed to these cruel methods and the extent of this corruption. There were many passionate voices at the meeting, many of which now mentioned Project Rebirth and the potential for a massive criminal network masquerading as an animal breeding operation. The more they discussed, as it became evident, Bella's situation was only the beginning of a systemic abuse that had been tolerated to fester for an excessive amount of time. And as night fell, the pressure of these revelations started to impact everyone. Dr. COI stayed late because he couldn't get rid of the notion that danger was imminent. Her thoughts were racing with the mysterious email and the ramifications of Project Rebirth as she stayed up late in her office. Started writing a thorough report detailing each threat, abnormality, and her hands swiftly went over each piece of evidence that suggested an organized criminal enterprise. Keyboard across town, driven by a combination of fear and resolve. Sarah's most recent investigative report, which revealed the first indications of Project Rebirth, was posted online. The unsettling techniques used by the breeding enterprise. The report swiftly gained widespread attention, igniting anger on using social media to raise local news outlets' attention to calls for justice and a comprehensive. The strain on local authorities and the internet realm were both affected by the probe. Increased in this furnace of growing dangers, community action, and research discoveries the story's protagonist had to face the horrifying prospect that the struggle for justice was about to take a risky turn. The silent, unflinching routine of the stray dog's daily, more than just a sign of optimism, journey to the swag rate now acted as a moving reminder that in a globe Where corruption flourishes in secrecy and brutality lurks in shadows, even the tiniest act of disobedience could show the way to salvation. In the days that followed the shocking revelations and dire cautions, the internet of relationships between the different players started tightening, forming new coalitions, and discovering secret subplots that entwined everyone's fates, leaving Dr. Cole still in shock. Due to the unsettling proof of intentional manipulation of Bella's reproductive system, she became more and more alone, although, late one night, after going over case files and reading the anonymous email alerting her to the danger, she was resolved to move on. She understood that in order to remain silent, the probe would need more than just clinical knowledge. The determination of her entire community to establish those partnerships. Dr. Cole made contact with a number of neighborhood organizations. She spoke with Ms. Lacey, the fervent spokesman for the local animal rights group that had been mobilizing support following Bella's. During a private meeting at a community facility, Ms. Lacey revealed her frightening findings. Tendencies in a number of local facilities. Bella's case isn't unique. Rather, it's a sign of a more serious issue. Her remarks resonated with Dr. Cole because she believes that by connecting our discoveries, we may reveal this network for what it is. Then they started combining their testimony with that of other area advocates, while Mrs. Jenkins remained devastated. Discovered unanticipated assistance from a group of former staff members of the shelter where Bella had previously stayed. Organized by a reputable community mediator and conducted in a private meeting, these people who were now prepared to jeopardize their safety disclosed that the establishment had been a part of an illegal breeding. An ex-employee who was shaking while narrating his experience stated that they utilized, "I never thought that we would use drugs to manipulate the dogs, even implanting strange items to prevent normal births." His statements serve as a crucial connection to the encrypted files Sarah possessed, demonstrating how agony would be commercialized. Revealed about Project Rebirth, strengthening the case against the dishonest network Sarah whose public emotion had already been sparked by investigative reports, and they started working with a small cadre of local bloggers and independent journalists participated in a series of late-night planning meetings in a secure. They plotted the links between the breeding facility, the enigmatic emails, and even the unknown location. Indications of mid-level officials' engagement in the city planning office were assembling a mosaic of. One blogger documented every detail from dubious financial sources. This new cooperative's transactions and coerced breeding patterns combined to create a broader image of systemic exploitation. Endeavor strengthened Sarah's own reporting and connected her work with the simultaneous efforts of community advocates like Dr. Cole, Ms. Lacey, Officer Daniels, who had established himself as a reliable ally inside the police department, worked in the background to link the. Over the course of several separate sessions with forensic specialists and undercover investigators, he discovered that a number of the same network involved in Bella's case had planned break-ins at other shelters as a form of intimidation. Example, there appears to be a trend here. He confided in Dr. Alvarez. The identical strategy appears in several instances, suggesting they're attempting to intimidate anyone who could reveal his will to safeguard animals in danger. And the community started to bolster the ties between local advocates and law police, adding another level to the expanding subplot. After gradually making amends with Tommy, Marcus, the estranged relative, was thrown into the center of. Marcus chose to express his thoughts about the investigation after getting his own mysterious warning during an anonymous phone call. In a moving speech, he stated, "I know I'm just one voice in my experience with a local community forum. However, the tale of my family is a part of this greater battle in which we must hold those accountable for their readiness to come forward," made the problem more relatable to many locals who had previously thought of the situation as just. Councilwoman Ramirez arranged a community outreach event when residents witnessed another solitary occurrence, convened to talk about the next measures for safeguarding the local heritage and populations who are at risk, as well as the linkages between all. In a passionate address, Ramirez highlighted how these scattered threads started to come together. This is about a network of exploitation that has been permitted to continue, not just about one dog, one woman, or one shelter. Thrive in the shadows. Therefore, law enforcement, campaigners, and veterinarians must band together. Community people and journalists to highlight these inequities and make sure that everyone in our community joins forces to combat cruelty by calling on. Unity struck a deep chord, and many attendees vowed to join the newly established watchdog organization tasked with keeping an eye on nearby breeding facilities and reporting any additional mistreatment to the community. Support network grew, and even nearby companies started to pay a little attention. Motivated by the expanding movement, a pet supply business owner offered to contribute a portion of his earnings to support the independent inquiry. If we don't advocate for the voiceless, by who will he say? Along with others, a group of concerned citizens gathered at his store to make this gesture. Further proved that the community's battle against exploitation had spread to all levels in the following weeks as additional testimonies emerged and the evidence grew, revealing the ties between all of these people. Dr. Cole's steadfast dedication, Ms. Lacey's fervent support, and Sarah's. The commitment of Detective Daniel and the unvarnished emotional experiences of Mrs. Jenkins and Tommy Marcus created a resistance tapestry. Their combined efforts not only started to reveal the project's shadowy side, revival, but also promoted a feeling of solidarity and one goal that promised must oppose the established powers behind the illicit breeding program with every fresh disclosure and every tiny act of solidarity brought the subplots together to create a single, potent story that even in the face of institutionalized violence and threats, a community brought together by empathy could shed insight on the Bella's narrative, which was once a single tragedy, was now one of the darkest corners of corruption, becoming a beacon of hope. A rallying cry for justice for all the exploitation victims who had no voice. On a chilly, rainy morning at the clinic, tensions that had been building for weeks suddenly burst with growing indications of intentional manipulation of Bella's reproductive system and rumors of a large-scale illicit breeding network. Law enforcement, animal rights advocates, veterinary staff, and all stakeholders. While members of the local community were on the verge of a full-scale altercation, that morning, Dr. Samantha. The waiting area was in an extraordinary state of disarray when Cole arrived at the clinic. Stories had spread like wildfire. The local police were preparing a significant raid on the project's hostile forces, an alleged breeding facility. Rebirth was allegedly organizing to stifle any additional inquiry. Dr. Cole's heart raced as she looked over the most recent records on her computer, which now contained undercover statements, authorities, and supporting statements from former breeding facility staff. Each additional information added to the feeling that a catastrophe is imminent outside the clinic. Officer Daniels and a number of investigators had assembled in a private parking area where they spoke quietly to one another and loaded their cars with. Officer Daniels clarified, "We have credible leads now, and we have additional surveillance equipment." His tone, which combines caution and resolve, indicates that the network responsible for these acts is preparing a concerted attempt to scare anybody who might expose them further. His colleagues nodded gravely. The threat was real now and would return soon. With shaking hands, Dr. Cole called an urgent team meeting and delivered the most recent data. Forensic testing, encrypted communications, and the devastating ultrasound pictures to create a comprehensive dossier. "Bella's disability is more than just a medical abnormality," she said, her voice echoing with both pain and resolution. "A direct result of intentional involvement. Therefore, we need to be ready for what happens next, for her benefit." And staff members muttered anxiously in response to her remarks about each animal in danger. Veterinary technician Lisa voiced her worry, saying, "I've been receiving those threatening calls too, and I'm scared for everything of us." The room went quiet as everyone understood that Bella wasn't the only person in risk. In the meantime, public outrage and community protests had reached a fever pitch for everyone who was looking for the truth. Outside the clinic, a sizable group of people had assembled, yelling and holding placards calling for justice for Bella, and several fervent animal rights activists and locals were among the protesters who used all the animals for their own purposes. People who lived there would share their personal accounts of being mistreated and neglected by shady breeding businesses. The peaceful morning was transformed into a clamor of righteous rage and urgent cries for change by voices resonating down the streets. Councilwoman Ramirez's accountability during a hurriedly planned press conference in a local community center. Sitting in front of an audience full of media and locals, we can no longer watch helplessly as our most vulnerable are. She claimed to have been taken advantage of by her harsh tone, and her hesitancy to present the information indicates a network of systemic cruelty that has betrayed the welfare and trust of innumerable animals. And we call for a thorough investigation, and we won't stop until all of the offenders are brought to justice. Her remarks resonated throughout the room, strengthening everyone's resolve as the press conference progressed. Sarah Now, known as one of the case's top investigative journalists, she published her most recent article online. From the alien fangs in Bella's uterus to the anonymous threats, the piece covered every startling revelation. Within hours of being received by clinic staff, her tale went viral, sparking comments from all throughout the region advocating swift action and a flurry of social media fury. Authorities should close the breeding facility and enact stronger regulations to shield animals from such inhumane treatment. Exploitation during these rising tensions. A turning point came when Officer Daniels was given in his superior's urgent call that a warrant has been issued for a raid on the breeding facility thought to be the operation at the heart of Project Rebirth was set to start in a few hours, and Officer Daniels informed his team, as we're leaving shortly, protecting and securing the evidence comes first. Potential witnesses, we need to exercise caution because this network is risky and might not go down without a fight. At the same time, Dr. Cole collected her at the clinic staff for a last debriefing prior to the police raid. We must be prepared for anything, she said steadily. Despite the obvious terror in the room, we have a responsibility to Bella and all the other creatures that have endured hardship. Guarantee that all of the evidence we have gathered is safe and that our records are comprehensive. The team worked hurriedly to save the ultrasound photos and arrange the files, knowing that the next few hours could make all the difference. Contrast, the air outside became tense with both excitement and fear as the raid's deadline drew near. In the distance, the neighborhood could hear the faint murmur of a coordinated action and the sound of sirens. Held its breath together, hoping that the upcoming measures would ultimately put an end to the brutality that had been discovered during that crucial period when law enforcement, animal advocates, and the brave clinic staff stood on the precipice of a pivotal surgery. The stakes were obvious, and Bella's predicament had sparked a conflict that went. It had evolved from a single instance of maltreatment to a representation of the conflict between exploitation and compassion, the culmination of growing evidence, public indignation, and a concerted police effort prepare the ground for a encounter that aimed to definitively reveal the breeding network's sinister underside as the cops. The environment at the clinic and in the neighborhood became quite tense as the planned attack on. Every second felt tense at the breeding facility, which was thought to be the project's heart of rebirth. Hurriedly and dangerously along the clinic's immaculate hallways, Dr. Cole and her crew rushed to protect all the evidence they had meticulously gathered, double-checked files. Bella's ultrasound's digital pictures were regularly backed up, and all the notes were arranged in the hopes that nothing would be overwhelmed by the commotion that was going to take place in the clinic doctor's little conference room. Before the attack started, Cole assembled her crew for a final, urgent briefing. "Pay close attention," she added, voice steadfast in spite of the adrenaline tremor. "We must protect all patient notes, ultrasound recordings, and other data. It is our responsibility to make sure that all evidence is kept safe, including the private reports from our forensic experts. We are not only fighting for Bella today, we are fighting for all animals who have been harmed by this network." The employees there deal with a variety of. Lisa, a veterinary technician, nodded in unison with terror and commitment. She brushed away a tear as she heard those threatening calls and whispered, "We can't let them win Bella's pain and the pain of so many others. While many others must not be in vain, there's a noticeable." The community was buzzing because word of the upcoming raid had swiftly circulated via local activist networks, social media platforms, animal advocacy organizations, community planners, and even at a temporary command center established in the area, concerned citizens had rallied in support of the probe. Councilwoman Ramirez worked tirelessly with neighborhood leaders to manage the parking lot at the community center. "We stand on the precipice of a pivotal moment," she said to the assembled gathering. "We demand justice for Bella and other innocent lives as the evidence against these criminals grows. Exploited by these activities, we will not permit cruelty and profit to override her words of justice and compassion." Passionate opportunity and the cacophony of encouraging voices served to inspire the community. Among those, longtime locals, business owners, and even a few empathetic city officials were in attendance, joined the cause covertly, and there was a clear cohesiveness and an implicit pledge that they would directly face the forces of corruption at the same moment that, in a well-coordinated maneuver, Officer Daniels broke the tent when sirens sounded, directed a group of investigators and undercover agents toward the breeding facility while a different tactical unit was sent to guard the clinic and its surroundings, making sure that all evidence was undamaged and that inside the breeding facility, every effort at sabotage would be promptly recorded. And the atmosphere was tumultuous in the shadow of darkness in an old, unremarkable warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Cops broke through the building's perimeter, and after a heated confrontation, a security guard who was probably, as the illegal network hurried to build a defense, they heard the sound of boots, and a group of people in one room were surrounded by the hum of urgent orders, gathered close to one another, their faces covered in terror and desperation upon realizing. When the authorities had returned to the clinic at last, Dr. Cole was given a call from Officer Daniels, who conveyed the first information in a steady but frantic voice. "Indications of success. We've secured the building and discovered records that connect them to several unlawful." "Dr. Coy, we need your complete report right away." He swallowed a lump of emotion, reassured him. "I'll forward everything immediately. Bella's situation has led to the discovery of a lot bigger network. Kindly keep us informed." The exchange highlighted the importance of the situation. A single instance of aberrant canine replication had developed into a comprehensive inquiry into systemic abuse when emotions between the two opposing elements increased during the raid. Reached their zenith in the main hall of the building, a fight broke out. The manager yelled, "You have no idea what you're meddling with," between a mid-level manager and a lead detective. "Your time is up. The evidence will speak for itself." The detective shot back. A furious argument that was later caught on many body cameras and became a symbol reverberated throughout the building of the impending conflict between justice and corruption outside as the police evacuated the building and arrested a number of suspects. And members of the neighborhood gathered around the clinic to use their iPhones to watch the events unfold. Social media was ablaze with real-time information and passionate support posts for the continuing stray dog inquiry. Despite being bandaged, Resolute moved to its typical location beside the sewer grate. Resolute pace that was unaffected by the mayhem surrounding it represented the community's unwavering spirit. Reminder that despite adversity, optimism and fortitude endure at. Councilwoman Ramirez and other local officials simultaneously hosted an unplanned press conference close to the, "Well, this raid marks a watershed," she said fervently, "and today we have demonstrated that the opinions of the people who care about justice and compassion cannot be, despite being suppressed by the forces of greed. We will not give up until all of the offenders are held responsible." Speech struck a chord with many people, inspiring gratitude and unity throughout the region. In that pivotal moment, when the imprisoned individuals were led away by a doctor and law enforcement gathered the remaining evidence, the encounter at the clinic left Officer Daniels and the entire team feeling both relieved and determined. In addition to exposing a network of cruelty, the breeding operation had also sparked the potential for every choice made throughout the attack, from the careful gathering of information to the courageous community leaders' stance, had advanced the investigation's ultimate objective of bringing Bella justice. And to safeguard the weak following the severe raid, the air surrounding the clinic and the breeding the facility was filled with anxiety and unresolved anger following the successful seizure of important records and proof had rocked the criminal network behind Project Rebirth. But the last blow had not yet been delivered. Instead, there was a noticeable sense of uncertainty over the neighborhood as though every second was fraught with the potential for yet another turn of events. The stakes had never been higher, and every character community advocates, law enforcement, and veterinarians. And the weight of an approaching reckoning inside the clinic doctor was felt by everyone, even the choir to the determined stray dog. In a poorly lit meeting room, Samantha Cole assembled her weary employees, the walls still reverberating with the echoes of their collective uneasiness was now silently seen by past clashes. "We've gone a long way," she remarked, a voice that was a mixture of tiredness and unwavering resolve. "But I can't get the believing that this is only the beginning, because the materials we found point to a deeply ingrained network that has penetrated not only the animal breeding industry, but also some areas of our local government." Speaking with a subtle urgency, highlighted how tenuous their victory was. Each piece of evidence that was now obtained was both a victory and create a two-pronged weapon that may both reveal the offenders and incite them to retaliate outside in the cold and tense evening. Locals gathered in small groups close to the clinic and the former building. Councilwoman Ramirez, who was clearly overwhelmed by the duty of guiding her community through these turbulent times, stood on a temporary platform set up in a nearby parking lot, the whisper and the wind tearing down her hair. Speaking to the assembled gathering, she said, "We have witnessed a horrifying abuse of power. But tonight, we stand united. Our fight is not over until every last minute," she said. "The offender is brought to justice, and all victims, regardless of size," shielded her appeal for unity and vigilance, which reverberated powerfully off of icy concrete and ignited a resolute. Officer Daniels called a strategy discussion with his staff in a room full of people nodding as the night became darker. Secure position close to the scene, the room was dimly lighted by the gentle buzz of computers and the glimmer of, according to our intel's classified communications, the network is already restructuring. According to Daniels' report, Ed, we overheard conversations implying that the people behind Project Rebirth are planning a retaliatory action. We need to be prepared for any response, and our next course of action will be crucial in making sure that the evidence maintains and that nobody is harmed more. His remarks highlighted the delicate equilibrium between their difficult one's progress and the danger of a strong, unseen foe in the meanwhile. With her most recent report on the raid and the investigation, Sarah, the fearless investigative journalist, found herself at a crossroads. In addition to igniting public opinion, new information had drawn the attention of some extremely dangerous individuals. She found a fresh, concerning message on her laptop late one night while going through a number of encrypted mails. "Believe you've won, but this is just the beginning. Keep quiet now or face the repercussions." The terrifying warning sent a chill down her spine as she realized how serious her work was and how much it could cost her personally. Unquestionable, but despite her racing heart, she decided to keep revealing the truth since she knew that Bella's narrative and the abuse network had to be disclosed regardless of the danger. Tommy and Marcus were sitting on a lawn. Echoes of recent events remain haunted by a bench beneath a flickering streetlight close to the now famous sewer grate. Tommy, whose eyes had witnessed the stray dog's unchanging ritual, and both despair and a spark of hope, firmly grasped Marcus's hand and said, "I'm afraid, son," in a trembling voice. "It feels like we're standing on the I'm not sure if we're prepared for what's going to happen next." But Marcus is peering into his. With tears in his eyes, the father spoke quietly and resolutely. "Remember what the dog taught us, that despite the appearance of a chilly and gloomy world, there is always a glimmer of hope, even if it means confronting their worst selves in an honest and personal conversation." Set the stage for the internal conflicts that would characterize the upcoming hours at the clinic as the clock approached. At midnight, the team nurse's stress reached an all-time high. Even the administrative staff and technicians were under pressure from the upcoming. Despite her internal conflict, retaliation, Dr. KSN held her hand steady, completed her in-depth report on Bella's case, understanding that it might hold the secret to destroying the complete criminal network, the forensic information, and the ultrasound pictures, and the meticulous compilation of former shelter staff members' testimonials, each of which bears witness to the harshness. They were resolved to reveal that in that tense environment, every second appeared to drag with a mixture of fear and. Meanwhile, the stray dog, a silent observer of everything that had happened, hobbled to its regular location beside the sewer. Grating one final time prior to the last push, its existence served as a moving reminder of the strength of even the. As the first signs of daybreak peeked over the horizon, the tiniest act of resistance. Every character, including the courageous, the weak, the resolute, and the terrified, stood on the edge of an momentous occasion when the fight for justice to safeguard Bella and innumerable other victims without a voice had reached its zenith during a stormy night's black veil. And when the time for reckoning finally came, the cops had gathered outside the infamous breeding facility. They prepped with their siren resonating through the deserted industrial park to carry out the raid that would reveal the entire scope of the project's rebirth within the facility. A rundown. For years, there was a tense, dreadful atmosphere in the warehouse, which was shrouded in secrets and shadows. Of illicit animal breeding had flourished in quiet, but now all of the injustices that had been repressed were about to explode into the light. Precisely at 5:45 a.m., the warehouse's hefty oak doors were. A group of tactical cops wrenched it open, and the intrusion broke the stifling silence in a matter of seconds. Chaos broke out in the main hall, where rows of improvised cages and haphazard stacks were barely lit by weak lights. Of documentation. The ringleader is a thin man whose eyes have been darkened by years of cruelty. "You're under arrest," an officer's voice roared as I looked up in fear freeze, echoing from the concrete walls, and before the man could react, a number of cops surrounded him. In that tense time, every piece of evidence that Dr. Cole and her colleagues had was handled with swiftness and resolve. Meticulously collected, turned become a weapon against the dishonest network outside, where people flocked in large numbers as news. Every second of the drama that was developing was captured on camera by Councilwoman Ramirez. Standing close to the clinic where the inquiry had started, spoke to the gathering in a resolute enthusiasm. "We're taking back our community today, and we won't put up with exploiting our weaknesses. This raid involves more than just one dog's pain, concerning putting an end to the cycle of cruelty that has plagued our streets for far too long." The live broadcast's amplified comments struck a chord with the hundreds of locals who had gathered to see the clash within the warehouse amidst the cries and noise of the raid day. In one especially terrifying scene, a group of terrified employees were forced to crouched in a corner for years in solitude, one of them a young man whose, as he confessed on camera, his eyes showed the anguish of his coerced involvement, and he could be heard sobbing quietly. "I never wanted. I was afraid and had no choice but to do it since they forced us to." His voice's raw anger was a terrible testament to the widespread torture that had been concealed behind closed doors. A resolute undercover agent taped his confession, which was meant to serve as a pillar in the prosecution of the breeding operation, while Officer Daniels, who's consistent throughout the inquiry, which was coordinated with forensic specialists within a mobile command center, leadership had been a shining example. "Senator, the area has been secured." He characterized his tone as cautious and resolute, "and we are currently gathering record all of the digital proof. This is the breakthrough we've been anticipating." His remarks were interrupted with disarray as team members searched the building for any evidence of illicit activities. Among the things they found were thorough documentation of forced breeding cycle receipts for substances that are not authorized, and even a number of encrypted communications that, as the raid went on, mentioned Project Rebirth in terrifying detail. The ringleader's stubborn stare gradually gave way as he was brought out in handcuffs. Resignation during this tragic scene. Dr. Cole was standing close to A. As she observed the result of her unwavering quest for the truth through the facility's glass, her heart began to race. Her eyes welled with tears, not just because she was saddened by Bella's pain, but also because of the bittersweet victory that justice was at last being served. Bella said in a scarcely discernible whisper, "Your suffering won't be in vain over the uproar, since we are fighting for all the voiceless today." Her remarks are filled with both. Sarah's camera captured anguish and a tremendous determination that was subsequently aired to millions of people. Outside, As the first rays of morning appeared above the crowd, the collective roar blended with the fading sirens. The lonesome daily routine of Horizon the stray dog has come to represent unshakable. Despite a recently, the dog limped steadfastly because to a bandaged leak and the obvious marks of previous mistreatment. With its silhouette against the gentle glow of the early morning light, it became a live symbol of resolve. Resistance serves as a powerful reminder that even the tiniest deed of compassion can spark a revolution at that pivotal point when police seized the final of the burden of institutional injustice was exposed for everyone when incriminating evidence was found and several important people were imprisoned. To witness Councilwoman Ramirez address a sea of faces that were both hopeful and emotional, proclaimed that we have demonstrated today that when our community comes together, no amount of corruption can stop us from demanding fairness. This marks a turning point in our history, a triumph over cruelty and selfishness. The declaration was greeted with roaring applause, and the crowd's enthusiasm grew with a newfound resolve for all who had participated in the operation, including the courageous officers, the kind clinic employees, and the advocates who never give up, and even the brave stray dog that witnessed the events of the night. Marked a difficult victory. It was the point at which all of the risks taken, all of the acts of defiance, and every cry for justice came together to form a single, unforgettable, life-changing incident. As a general feeling of cautious hope permeated the situation as the commotion abated and the detained offenders were led away. In addition to destroying an exploitative network, the raid had ignited a movement that pledged to safeguard the community's most vulnerable members against future abuse. In the gentle glimmer of dawn, stood together as the first light of a new day, their hearts and minds permanently altered by what had happened that night. The once turbulent events at the clinic and the shadowy hallways of the breeding facility started to creep over the city. The raid had destroyed a vital component of the fragile or hopeful quiet of the illicit network supporting Project Rebirth, and the data gathered indicated that Bella and Four. Following the dramatic showdown, the society would soon serve many additional creatures that had been exploited. Even though the night's events had left them scarred, they were starting to mend thanks to a common goal and none. Dr. Samantha Cole's unwavering desire for accountability, whose life had been forever altered by Bella's pain, was now leading a campaign to change local animal welfare procedures. In the silent days following the raid, she carefully examined the last bits of evidence, keeping her hand steady while her heart continued to race with unresolved grief. And as she put together her report, she muttered, "Resolve, Bella's pain will not be forgotten." She was certain that every detail would act as a spur for transformation. Her enthusiasm had kindled an inspirational police enforcement, community officials, and concerned people in addition to her co-workers at the clinic to rally. The tone inside the clinic was solemn yet resolute in its opposition to cruelty. After working relentlessly under M's pressure and receiving anonymous threats, the veterinary crew now shared moments of peaceful companionship. Lisa, the young technician whose shaky voice had once betrayed her concern, gave a little. She patted Bella's head, which was now resting in a recovery section, with a brave smile. "With love and kindness all around us, we've done everything we can," she murmured quietly. And now, she stated simply but sincerely that it is the responsibility of the system to guarantee that no animal ever experiences this type of maltreatment again. Jenkins, the kind-hearted, misses the shared expectation that their work would open the door for long-lasting reforms. After saving Bella from the streets, the soul found comfort in the community's reaction, which was no longer a lonely person weighed down by grief. She was welcomed by both activists and neighbors who had united around the case. She recounted heartfelt memories of the dog at a small memorial gathering hosted by local animal rights organizations. She once knew a kind, compassionate being named Bella, whose pain had been the focal point of a huge, evil network. Symbol of hope, she spoke in a shaky yet firm voice, reminding us of her bravery in the face of unspeakable evil. We must remember her by making sure that justice is served in parallel communities, because every act of compassion counts. With increased vigor, Leaders such as Councilwoman Ramirez carried out their duties regarding the temporary injunction on the. In addition to stopping the immediate threat, the redevelopment project had preserved a larger movement at a. Ramirez spoke before a sea of resolute faces during a press conference held in the renovated community center today, and we have seen she stated that our community will not tolerate cruelty and exploitation going unchecked, and that we are acting. Specific actions to update regional animal welfare regulations and guarantee that establishments like the one that injured Bella is either permanently closed or reconstructed. But our battle is far from done. Every victory, no matter how tiny, moves us one step closer to a kinder future that is safer. Officer Daniels, whose steadfast commitment served as a pivotal element of the operation, also demonstrated. During a quiet period at the precinct, he went over the case files and he whispered to a colleague, "The evidence we found during the raid has revealed a terrible chapter, but this is only the start of a far greater endeavor to safeguard those unable to defend themselves." His dedication to adhering to the every step of the investigation served as a reminder that even in the most obscure places, the search for. As the days went by after Sarah's groundbreaking investigation, justice remained crucial. Reports kept becoming more popular on the internet and in local news sources. Articles full of heartfelt stories and vivid details that are not just educational. The general public, but also sparked community action. Her efforts became a rallying call, demonstrating the strength of tenacious journalism in bringing the mighty to account and providing the voiceless with a voice in the community today. Gradually started to recover, and the prospect of legal reform surfaced in silence. Bella's story, which had previously been veiled in mystery and suffering, underwent a change. Become a representation of our shared tenacity, the journey of the stray dogs, the courage of Dr. Cole and her staff, and everybody's unwavering perseverance had created a compassionate legacy that would not be readily. We encourage you to join us in our fight for compassion and justice before you leave. You've been moved by Bella's tale and reminded that every act of kindness can lead to significant change. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below with your ideas. Tell us how compassion has affected your life. What actions do you think societies can do to safeguard the weak? And remember to view our upcoming movie in which we chronicle the subsequent phase of this adventure, describing how local changes and, together, community initiatives are changing the face of animal welfare. Help ensure that no act of cruelty goes unreported and maintain the torch of hope blazing brightly with each subscription. Thank you for viewing, and please remember that every comment matters. Till the next time, remember to be kind and compassionate, and let's keep fighting for a better world, one life at a time. Duration.